All right. Good to see everyone. Father Ian Van Heusen here, going live. Actually, let me pull up my phone too. Let me go live on TikTok. Give me 2 seconds, Mandy.
No worries.
So I'm doing something a little bit different, guys, today. We're doing an interview, but since I have the capacity to do it with a live stream, I was like, hey, why don't we jump on my live stream? So this is actually for Divine Mercy Radio. Let me just get a little bit more set up. So I'm going to let Mandy kind of do our introduction for the radio, and then we'll kind of jump in. So go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Meet the Priest on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Here we present you with the opportunity to meet and learn about the devout men in and around our diocese who have an amazing impact on our lives as Catholics. I'm your host, Mandy Howard, and today with us we have Father Ian Van Heusen, and I'll go ahead and let our listeners know we're going to do something really exciting, because right now, in addition to our listeners listening to it on the radio, while we're interviewing, we're live streaming on Father Ian's YouTube and Facebook and all sorts of channels, right, Father?
And Twitter and all. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm on TikTok too. Now, I don't recommend TikTok. Don't see that as an endorsement for TikTok, but we are present on TikTok.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I wanted to say too, because I know for a lot of people who follow you, some of these questions, they're going to know the answers to, so just bear with us, but we hope that the Divine Mercy Radio listeners get to learn more about you. So to get started, where are you right now? What is your ministry? Where do you serve?
Yeah, so currently I'm at 2 assignments. So I am at East Carolina University as the chaplain, so doing campus ministry. And then I'm also at a parish. I'm at St. Peter's Catholic Church here in Greenville, North Carolina. They're about a mile apart in the neighborhood. And love this town of Greenville. It's funny, as an Army brat, I moved around a lot. So after about 4 years of living somewhere, it feels like home. So this is my 4th year here in Greenville. So I really feel part of the community. I love this town, love this area. It's a wonderful place to live.
Well, I love that. And I just go ahead and dive in too, because your ministry is so much bigger than that too. You have a big presence on social media. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what kind of happened probably, let me see, it was probably 6 years ago now. When I was a seminarian, I had an itch to write about prayer and meditation, about the spiritual life, about discernment, about entering into contemplative prayer, all those different aspects. And so I had this first to write. It just poured out of me. And then over years, it became more video stuff. I started working with a creative agency, Tim Robbins at Today Creative. We started developing the video side of things. Hold up a second. So we started developing the video side of things. And then just with each step, more and more, it's become integrated with what I do as a parish priest. And so the media apostolate, it's actually not separate so much from what I do. It's kind of integrated. It's all kind of woven in. And so we're able to do a lot of great stuff, a lot of great content flowing from homilies and stuff. And I just developed a great love for social media content. Actually, the funny thing is, on a consumer's end, the only kind of content I regularly consume, I don't watch television. I don't even own a television. In my apartment, all I have is my phone and my laptop. Most of the time I'm on my phone when I'm consuming content. So I love social media. I love social media in 101 ways. It's funny because a lot of people get really negative about social media. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of really good interactions, and there's strategies. We could always talk about that, how to eliminate trolls, how to eliminate negativity. But for me, around what we do, I have such a great community of support that I love being on social media every day, interacting with parishioners, a big part of my audience is in Greenville. And I just love interacting with my parishioners and everybody else on social media.
Well, and what an incredible time to have that skill set and to have that passion, because you were able to kind of go pretty seamlessly into providing ministering and mass for the people who follow you during this pandemic.
Yeah, we went live within a day. I called up Tim. I said, can you be here tomorrow? Because that first weekend, we immediately went live, and we kept getting better and better. And now actually Newman's outfitted for live streaming capacity more. And we adapted quickly. And that's been the big theme of this year. I'm going to be talking about a lot this year is what I've been saying is adapt and flourish. What we're looking to do right now, we're doing a youth event next Saturday. We're doing a live stream event tomorrow, is just doing a combination of high quality live stream events, but also that have an in-person component. So we're trying to hit people in multiple different ways. Some people are still a little cautious, or they're at risk because of the environment. And so they're staying at home, and we're just trying to make everybody feel connected in whatever way they feel comfortable.
That's so important. And that's so incredible, because you're absolutely right. People are coming from so many different directions on this. Some people, just for their mental health and sanity, need that connection again. And some people just, they're with their health or with people that they live with. It's too easy. So to have that combination is incredibly important. I watched an interview of you when you were a transitional deacon back in, I don't know what year were you ordained?
Oh gosh, I should know that. It was 5 years ago.
Okay. All right. So it would have been 5 years ago. And you talked then about your love for writing and that kind of love for outreach. And it seems like that's only blossomed.
Absolutely. And the only thing that's changed is with digital content, I'm able to talk freer and think quicker. So the writing, I love writing, but it's very tedious. But now I can jump on a live stream and do it instantaneously and record my thoughts. And so it's actually easier. It's like a creative outlet. And the funny thing is with all of this, I joke around with people. I've become a better listener because I talk so much now and get all those ideas out. And I have people who will listen to me. I don't like drive everybody crazy around me. Because when I was in seminary, I would drive everybody crazy because I wanted to talk about St. John of the Cross. I wanted to talk about all these different things. And people are like, "Will you just shut up? We're just trying to eat lunch or dinner," but now I have that outlet.
Well, that's good. Well, and kind of rewinding through those 5 years, you've been there 4. So there aren't a whole lot of other ministries, but what other parishes have you served at in the diocese?
I was at St. Bernadette's and Fuquay Varina. So
Okay.
If anybody knows, I joke around that the edge of the triangle is this restaurant called the Mason Jar. It's still very Raleigh feeling. And then if you go just a minute outside of town, it becomes rural very quickly. And so I joke around that the Mason Jar is the outer edge of the triangle. But I mean, it's kind of way out there. Most people haven't gone to it. But if you ever go to the Mason Jar, have you ever been to Holly Springs or?
I've been to Holly Springs, but I've never been to the Mason Jar. That sounds like something I've got to check out.
You got to go. They have buffalo chicken egg roll with ranch dressing.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty hard to beat. And the Mason Jar is there.
There's 2 of them. There's one in Holly Springs and one in Fuquay.
Okay. All right. I'll have to check that out for sure. But rewinding even further, what led you to consider the priesthood?
So it's kind of an interesting story. It starts off when I was a baby. Not that I thought I was going to be called to the priesthood, but I was in church, and I was actually, I was in church, and my sister was acting up in church. And my mom tells the story that I reached down and I touched her head, and she immediately got quiet and she stopped talking for the whole mass. And my mom at that point said, "He's going to be a priest." So it's interesting. So she said that, and she would tell this story growing up. But the irony is I was kind of a wild kid. Not like, when I say kind of a wild kid, like very wild. A parishioner was asking my sister once, he said to my sister, he's like, Father Ian talks about how wild he was. And do you think he's exaggerating? How wild was he? He's probably exaggerating. And my sister joked around and said, actually, he was probably worse than he's telling you.
Oh no. Well, and I'm sure she loved hearing that story over and over again, that you were the saint that quieted her down, especially if you went on to cause trouble.
Yeah. And she was the classic overachiever too. She went to West Point. So we're an Army family. So,
oh, wow. That's incredible. Yeah.
She decided in 7th grade that she was going to go to West Point. Only college she applied to.
That's phenomenal.
So and she went to West Point. That's a whole nother story. But so through middle school and high school, I was wild, but I think in a way that most people would find fascinating a little bit. I mean, so like, for example, I don't know if you remember the band Rage Against the Machine.
Of course.
So they came out when I was like 7th grade. And so when I was in 7th grade, I was listening to Rage Against the Machine. And my parents had a great books collection. We were at West Point, and they had a great books collection. I could understand Karl Marx but I couldn't understand Aristotle or Plato. I tried to read Aristotle and Plato. I couldn't understand them, but I could understand Karl Marx.
Oh,
So
no.
so that's how I got introduced to communism. And so I was big into that. I was reading books. I would go to the West Point Library, but I was also kind of hanging with a little bit of a wild crowd, a little bit of a party crowd. But I was also an athlete, and I would write voraciously, play soccer a lot. Through high school, I didn't know how to take this, but at one point they put in the yearbook, they put a picture of me coming up the ramp, and they said, "Watch out, here comes Ian." And that was like in my year. And I don't know
how to take that.
I still to this day, I mean, people from my high school still talk to me, but I was an athlete. So I became MVP of the soccer team my senior year. I was in theater. I wrote a lot. I would actually go to writing camps a lot. I did like New York State Young Writers Institute. I did Breadloaf up in Vermont, and some of those kind of liberal art, kind of artsy fartsy places. I did acting, was in like a student film for an NYU student film. So it's kind of all over the place. And and I was a different kind of person. I'm
not hearing the priesthood quite yet.
No.
When did this start coming in?
So I have a funny story. Yeah, we'll come to that in a second. I was in the high school youth group, and I don't know what my parents were thinking or what the youth ministers were thinking, but here's little Mr. Ian Van Heusen wearing a Wu-Tang Clan shirt at the youth group event. I looked at the picture. I'm like, why would they let me wear that shirt? I was like,
probably because you went to the youth group event. And as a mom, I'll tell you, that was probably the compromise in their mind. Like, okay, if you're going, whatever.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Maybe not.
So, yeah. So early in high school through college, high school, I felt a little bit of that draw when I was on these youth retreats. But to be blunt, I just really liked women and liked girls. I mean, so I was all about romance and relationships. In college, I kind of started to drift away. I was at SUNY Albany, very much drifted away. But I never liked the idea of being a conventional college student. In fact, I didn't even want to go to college, really. I wanted to drop out, and I wanted to go to New York City and be a writer and an artist. So I wanted to do Broadway, not Broadway necessarily, not like musicals, but like artsy fartsy. I was into like, Martin Scorsese type thing. So my parents convinced me to go to SUNY Albany, but I had no desire to make money or to make a living. I was kind of into this bohemian, be an artist. So I took all kinds of classes: Chinese painting, Japanese literature. I settled on an English major because one of the professors who was friends with Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and all those guys, he said, well, if you're an English major, you can study everything and you can write about anything that you want. And so I followed that path, started to get into left-wing activism. I was involved with a kind of like an alternative hippie school in Albany called the Albany Free School. Really didn't spend much of my time at all with the college life at all. I spent more of my time volunteering with this school and kind of around that crowd and the artists downtown. And I would put on shows and things like that. So long story short, there came a point when a lot of my bad mistakes were catching up with me, and I kind of had to figure things out a little bit. So it's kind of a little bit of a long story, but make a long story short, I was making some bad decisions and I had to move back in with my parents. Mm-hmm. So I didn't finish college, moved back in with my parents. That's when I came back into the faith. And one of the things with me, I don't know if it's a virtue or whatever, but I've never been a very moderate person, as you might have picked up on this. So when I came back into the faith, I wanted to be a contemplative monk and I wanted to be a hermit at first.
Okay.
So
sure.
Exactly. It kind of fits with so I was into St. John of the Cross. Some of that wasn't working. Actually, I know now why it wasn't working. I didn't realize at the time I have severe sleep apnea. So like I had to sleep like 10 hours a day, and I could never keep a regular sleep routine. So it's kind of always throwing off. So that was a big reason why I didn't go religious. Vocation was I had to sleep 10 hours a day. And I could never like keep up with monks because I would go to monasteries constantly. Now I'm on a CPAP machine. So now I'm realizing it's just only in the last 6 months. For my whole life, I struggled with sleep. And I thought it was just because I was like, I thought it was a little bit because I was lazy or something, that I just didn't have a strong enough will. And now I realize it's because I had severe sleep apnea. Mm-hmm. So at that time, I met Bishop Ned, who's then Father Ned, vocations director. And I started to discern for the Diocese of Raleigh. And so I at that time, though, I said, you know what? I've lived a kind of wild life. I need to be a little bit normal for a while. So I'm going to finish college in Fayetteville State. In Fayetteville, my parents were like, you're not going to Chapel Hill. You're not going to NC State. You had your chance to go to the big public school. You're saving money. You're living at home. You're working, and you want to enter seminary. You want to. It was kind of interesting when I first came back. The idea just came instantaneously that I wanted to be a priest, and I wanted to live the religious life. But I just felt like I needed to be a little bit more stable before I entered. And I think that was a wise choice for me at the time. So I finished college at Fayetteville State, and then I taught for 2 years in Fayetteville. And I bought a house and fixed it up with my dad and was playing soccer and all that. Had a good life in Fayetteville before I entered seminary. Yeah.
I want to pause just a moment, because there was definitely, and I know you said it's a long story, too long potentially to go into every detail, but there was quite a shift. There was a big jump in there. So you were making poor choices and they were catching up with you. So you went home, and then you said, even though you didn't follow it right away, you felt a calling to the religious life. Was there a moment? Was there a person or a book? Or do you remember exactly how that shift happened? Because there are plenty of people who, when they're making poor choices, can very easily just kind of continue to fall into that spiral and into kind of the depths of despair or depression or blame. Mm-hmm. And so for you to make that 180 and decide, nope, I'm going to commit my life, what do you think that was?
There's two moments. One was when I came back into the faith, where I was playing around with the ideas of spirituality. I was embracing, I was kind of halfway in. And then just one night, it kind of all occurred to me how terrible I'd lived my life and how if I didn't change my act, I was going to hell. I remember that. It was I realized I deserved hell for everything I had done. And that was huge moment, because I've realized that in the life of some people who come to believe or they come to convert, they don't necessarily have that black and white moment where they realize that what they've done is the logical conclusion of it is hell. And for me, that was a great moment of what I often now refer to as experiencing mercy, because I realized how bad I was and how wicked I had been, but how I have a second chance. And then so shortly thereafter, I went to confession. This is actually an interesting story. I went to confession, did a general confession, for an hour. I poured out my heart to Monsignor Brockman, who at the time was not the vicar general. So of course he can't refer to it. He can't talk to it. Please don't anybody put him on the spot. But it is funny because I was like, I didn't know he was going to be my kind of like my boss in 10 years or 10 years. And when I found out he was vicar general afterwards and I was entering seminary, I was like, oh man, this is not good. But anyways, but the same spot that he heard my confession, it was actually, I often talk about this, it was the only valid confession I had had my whole life to that point. Because when I was a kid, confession wasn't emphasized. I tell the story, I was in a youth group and I was going to confession to the priest and I knew him and I lied. I didn't tell my mortal sins. So it was really the first confession I ever went to outside of maybe my first communion that was a valid confession was with Monsignor Brockman at the off at St. Pat's Catholic Church in Fayetteville. Fast forward 10 years, I'm sitting in the exact same spot about to be ordained with Bishop Burbidge because I was ordained at St. Pat's. And the office was the exact same as when I would go to confession, spiritual direction with Monsignor Brockman. I was just like, oh, this is crazy.
That's like a God wink. That's God letting you know that you're on the right path. I think those moments always come for me. For our Divine Mercy Radio listeners, if you're just joining us, we're here with Father Ian Van Heusen, and you can watch us live or on YouTube. That we are going live as we speak on all sorts of social media channels. And So if you've been through kind of this tumultuous past and your family witnessed this, what was their reaction when you decided you wanted to become a priest?
I think it was actually, my discernment period was actually like 3 or 4 years. So they slowly got used to the idea that it was actually going to happen. Cause at first they were like, I don't think you're cut out to be a priest. I think like they were just like, I mean, they thought it wasn't a bad idea, but they were like, you need to like kind of reestablish yourself a little bit. You've made a lot of bad decisions. Then they were very excited. By the time I entered seminary, and it was becoming real that like this was going to happen. And then ironically, hold up a second. Ironically, my mom started to become scared because she was like, is he only entering seminary because of me and this whole thing from when he was a kid? And we didn't talk about that the whole time I was in seminary through early priest. We've never told that story about when I was a little kid. But then my sister joked around. She's like, Mom, when has Ian ever done something just to please you? That's just not how it
Good for big sister coming across with just some hard truth.
Yeah, exactly. But through early, like by the time I was entering seminary, they were all very excited and very proud. And it was my seminary. It was good. It was a good experience. Seminary is a difficult time because part of it is you're not sure what kind of priest you're going to be, or if you're going to make it to priesthood, if that's what you're called to do. And it was a very uncertain time for you because I thought I understood what would make a good priest, but I wasn't sure. And then a lot of times in seminary, one of the challenges is you're always hearing about what makes a good priest and what makes a bad priest. This is something that's constantly discussed. And so you're just always wondering, am I going to be a good priest or am I bad? And there's a kind of tension.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until like 3 or 4 years into priesthood, like last year, the year before, where you kind of settle down and you're like, okay, I think I got this.
Yeah.
And they talk about the 5-year mark as the most key moment. I'm just coming to that 5-year mark as a priest. And I can understand why, because, at a certain point you start to realize, like I'm at a point now where I can walk into a funeral or a wedding and not have to like spend hours and hours like slaving over it. And I kind of know what to say. And I kind of know how to gauge people's reactions. Like if I'm going to say something that people aren't going to like, I kind of can gauge that a little bit. I kind of know what are the things that are going to bother people. What are the things that are going to challenge people? What are the things that people are going to love? And kind of balance all of those things. But when you're a seminarian, you just hear so many different conflicting voices and you hear so many different views on, well, what's going to make an awesome priest?
Do you credit that kind of growing comfort more to just being able to read people and doing things so often? Or do you feel like you've got a growing trust for the Lord in that you're no longer kind of questioning yourself? What is it, a combination of both?
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, I think all of the above. Well, and a trust in your intuition, because that's the big thing is when in any field that you work, and in that intuition being the Holy Spirit ultimately, is you have to make a lot of decisions on the fly. And then at a certain point, if you've been making those decisions on a consistent basis and they keep having good results and you keep going through with your gut, that starts to build a certain confidence. And it can only be the fruit of experience. Like, and I see that in seminarians. I talk a lot with seminarians now. I've seen a few over the summer and just hung out with them. And you can feel that uncertainty in them, even though like a lot of times when I see the seminarians, majority of the time I see their strengths and I see that they'll probably do a lot of things that really resonate with people. But until you've experienced that on a regular basis. And I think one of the most important qualities that came out in my first 5 years of priesthood was how important it was. And it sounds so simple, but it's true. How important it was that I loved my people. That like, because there's a lot of things that will happen that can really get on your nerves and that can really bother you. But when you love the person who's doing it, when you really love your parishioners, I've been fortunate that especially this assignment, it's small enough that a lot of times when something happens, I actually know the person beforehand. It can be a little unnerving if like you're always in a situation where you don't know that many people and it's always strangers, then sometimes you can assume the worst. But like when somebody does something that gets on your nerves, but you know them and you love them, and that has helped a lot. I've thought about that a lot, how much I actually love my people, and how much that guides. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. And that's probably something that could be gleaned for people in every part of their life. I think the more that you love anyone, for a nurse, for a teacher, for someone working in an office, if you can see the other people first and love them as people, then probably everything else is a little easier to deal with. I always ask what kind of fears and doubts you may have had kind of coming into the priesthood and through seminary, but I'm especially interested to hear what you have to say because you lived such different lives. So like what were you really wrestling with when you were coming toward ordination?
See, the problem is how honest are you going to be with it? I mean, one of my fears was getting kicked out. That was that was the big one. That was that they would wake up and say, how did we let this guy in? And actually it's funny. One of my key mentors, he said to me my last year, he said, when I first read your profile, I said, how did we let this guy in? So it was legitimate. We joked around about it, but, I think this is just going to, there's no way of getting around this that's not like somewhat edgy and controversial, especially when it comes to fears. There's a view right now that there's a contrast between being pastoral and loving and being orthodox and being truthful, and speaking the truth. That's a big thing that both sides really, no matter what side you take on this, they really project that image. So that if you speak the truth, that people are going to hate you. And I can't speak for every situation, but one of the things that has happened here in Greenville is, and I think it's the fruit of my family, my relationships, which is, I was thinking about this the other day, and my family, if we're being polite to you and we're being friendly and we're being really gracious and being kind of neutral, that probably means we're not comfortable with you. Like,
same. Yes, I understand.
Now, if we're challenging you and like trying to motivate you and being a little hard on you, the harder some of my family members are being, probably the more we love you and the closer you are. And I would say the same with the parish. My first assignment, I love them dearly, but I was only there for 2 years. I was a new priest, still testing the waters, still trying to build that rapport. But with this assignment, I kind of fell in love with it very quickly. And especially in the third and fourth year, like last year and the year before, I started to open up about what my fears are for my people. And my fears is that they're going to go to hell, right? That's real. Like we believe that, like the consequence of mortal sin is hell. And I don't preach about it coming from a place of judgment, but like that I really do love the people. Like I don't want them to go to hell. And so when I see them doing things that could put their soul in mortal danger, I talk about it because out of a place from love. And I'll never forget one of the homilies that was a turning point. It was a huge moment for me. I was talking with the parish. We had an Advent penance service, and hardly anybody showed up. And phone's ringing.
That happens.
That's funny. I should have turned it on. So nobody showed up, and a few of the priests joked around like, oh, there's no sinners in this parish. I was livid. I was furious. And then a few other things happened where it became clear that there was just a little bit of things that needed reform in that regard. And I got up in front of everybody and I said, I'm concerned that you're going to go to hell if you don't go to confession. You need to start going to confession. And I was pissed, and I didn't smile. I wasn't laughing about it. I didn't crack a joke, which I'm generally pretty friendly, but I said, I love you guys dearly. Most of you are in danger of going to hell if you're not going to confession. And for me, it was a huge kind of, it's funny. We talk about vulnerable. It was kind of like a vulnerable moment, if that makes sense. Normally people don't think of that kind of thing as being vulnerable, but when you're speaking truly from your heart, like that was my concern for them at that moment. And it was actually very well received. Even people who somewhat kind of disagreed, it was very well received. And I think this message that you have to either sugarcoat everything and be sicky sweet and emphasize the positive, or you're kind of angry and bitter, and you're kind of fighting culture wars. I think it's a false dichotomy. I think one of the big things I would also say, I actually heard this from a priest who is diametrically the opposite of me, but he's a man that I kind of love dearly, but he's a little crazy. Father Noonan in Fayetteville. If anybody's ever been to Mass, I tell the story. This is being just honest out there. If anybody's grown up in the diocese, they recognize these dynamics. My first preaching, priests of my generation were like, follow the rules, say the black, do the red, that's kind of like the mentality. And so here's my first preaching at St. Pat's. Father Noonan, they're bringing him the book for the opening prayer. He goes, nah, I don't need the book. I just freestyle it. And he just freestyled a majority of the Mass, only doing the Eucharistic prayers. So the opposite of what I've been trained, the opposite of what I would do as a priest, but in a weird kind of way, heart of gold. And he was talking in daily Mass once. And I was there as a seminarian. And he said something that stuck with me. He was talking about, he said, he was criticizing conservative priests. But it was true. What he said, you point out all of my sins, but you don't challenge me to grow. I thought about that. That was interesting. Challenging people to grow is not the same as critiquing all of their faults. I think as a priest, I try to set the bar very high, for myself and for other people. But I try to motivate them like a good coach. I often use a lot of coaching analogies, right? I joke around. Everybody hates the idea of an angry God, but they're okay with an angry Coach K, right? It's okay if Coach K gets angry to motivate, but like if God gets angry to motivate, then, oh man, you're being like old school. Like, but we all recognize that a leader and things like that can be angry. Why not just say that when we mess up, that God could be as well, from a healthy perspective, sure, like Coach K. A
passionate kind of response. Absolutely. No. And I think the listeners will really appreciate everything you said. I appreciate it. I think, again, it's not only good to know that the priests, have differences within themselves, and the idea that you guys are reconciling those and debating and kind of having those discussions, because right now in the world, it seems like you can either be on one side or the other, and there's not it's a false dichotomy. You can either be right or you can be wrong. And the idea of learning from one another and growing, I think, is a message that I hope more people embrace. That's a beautiful message.
Yeah. And I hope when we get back together that we'll be able to talk. Because I've been surprised with the older priests. There are a lot of older priests that we disagree strongly on certain things, but then we're able to come together and really support each other. There's a few older priests that I would say, if you know the internal politics of the Diocese of Raleigh, are just very different, their perspective on a lot of things, but there has been a truly fraternal support that I've always appreciated.
Oh, that's very good to hear. And maybe that's the answer to this question, but maybe not. What has been the most joyous revelation that you've had working as a priest?
The power of God's mercy and the power of forgiveness. But it's like, it's not the concept of mercy. I talk about this a lot. Not the concept of the mercy, but the experience of mercy. One of the powerful things that I encounter a lot of times one-on-one in confession and one-on-one spiritual direction is where somebody takes something that's incredibly difficult, incredibly vulnerable. And this is like ugly stuff. This isn't like, I'm not even saying that this is really ugly, gut-wrenching stuff. And they bring it to the light of day, and they're shocked at my experience of being happy for them that they were able to expose it, because it was so angry, so fearful, so ugly to them. And it really is ugly stuff. And they kind of expose that ugly part of themselves. and you're able to talk about how God loves them. Like, that's mercy. Like, God loves you in the midst of all of this. And being able to walk with people. I love that great line, accompany people. It really is true. And that's when, I've been surprised many times when I come to that moment with somebody, either spiritual direction or confession. And it's just such a moment of grace. It's really powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can tell you, I am one of those people who was guilty for many years between college and having kids of not going to confession regularly as I should have, to say the least. And it is really incredible when you walk away, and every time walking away feeling brand new, like a brand new person with a weight lifted off your shoulders, and feeling that mercy is absolutely incredible. Was there anything that surprised you, or anything that you didn't expect about your vocation?
I was surprised at how much I loved hearing confessions. That actually happened like the first week. So what happened was, I was totally selfish. This is not like a thing to brag about, but I wanted to give my stole for my first confession to my dad at my first mass. So if I was going to do that, my first mass was going to be on Sunday after my ordination. I had to hear confessions on Saturday. And so I jump in the confessional thinking, okay, these will be some softballs, whatever, no big deal. And then I'll go home and I got the stole. This is not very altruistic in this. But the thing that struck me immediately was, one, they didn't care it was my first day. Nobody even noticed. They I was just a priest to them. And then two, it was so refreshing when I first started hearing confessions that it wasn't about me anymore. Like, that's a really tough thing with seminary, and actually with college students. People criticize a lot of college students about how selfish they can be. But the challenge is, when you're in school, everything at college and everything at seminary is geared towards helping you and helping you grow. And then 1 minute after you're in the working world, it's no longer about you. You need to perform, if you will. So when I hear confessions, people, generally speaking, and I try, if they do ask me, I'm like, it's not about me, but like, they don't care about if I'm having a good day or a bad day. They need confession, spiritual direction. And that really struck me that first day. And I loved it. I actually signed up a bunch of times in my first few weeks of priesthood. I asked everybody if I could come. At the time, the Passionists were doing daily confession, and they would have an hour and a half. I said, I'll come and hear confessions. I heard like 10 hours my first week.
Wow.
I was just excited. Our first 2 weeks. Yeah. I heard like 10 hours.
That's incredible. Well, and I don't want to take you off that topic at all, but speaking of the college students, for our listeners, especially, who, when you hear, all we hear, and this is kind of my last official question, but I feel like whenever you hear about college kids, it's usually in the negative, or the selfish, or the, unaware, kind of self-absorbed, social media kind of college kids. Can you give us another view of college kids, since you are working on a daily basis with kids who are involved in their faith, who are active? What do you see in your college kids?
I think the challenge is, what I've always encountered with young people is, I've encountered this when I was a seminarian and I worked with college students through here, is they often fluctuate between extremes sometime in the same week. They'll do something that'll move you, that'll be inspiring, and they'll do something profoundly stupid, because like they're just working through that process of trial and error. Mm-hmm. But what I've always been struck by, is I've just always enjoyed their company. And I think like college students and all that are capable of great things when they're challenged to grow, and they're given responsibility, and they're given an environment that, if they fail early on, they make mistakes. It's not a high pressure, environment. And I found that in that context, when you do that, because it's actually not just the college students are young people that I work with, but also there's the focus missionaries, which is a fascinating dynamic, because they're only like a couple of years out of college. So, really, they're out of college, but they're almost the same kind of boat. They just have a little bit more training and things like that. And what you always have to realize is that when you're working with younger folks is they're not professionals yet. They don't have the experience yet. And you always have to remember that like there's a lot of inconsistencies with working with college students, but you have to kind of let them step up and kind of try things out, spread their wings a little bit. And what I've seen with the focus missionaries, I've seen with having focus is how much that can have a huge impact. And there's a fascinating dynamic. I always love with one of the coolest things about college students and high schoolers that if you ever work with them, they can change their life around in like a weekend, which is really fascinating because when you get up to like my age, like I'm getting pushed to 40, people don't change that fast in their 30s and 40s or as they get older. Change is a slower process. But with a college student, they can have a pretty dramatic conversion within a month. And that's kind of cool to watch. And you see them come alive and passionate and yeah.
Well, it sounds like you are in the exact place where you need to be speaking for someone who has lived different roads in your life and have had conversions yourself. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for being with us. And that is officially kind of time for the radio segment of the show. And I can wrap that up with our closing. Or
yeah, go ahead.
All right, here we go. So that is Meet the Priest for another week. All right, thanks. I'm going to try that again, Peter. To all you guests out there. That's Meet the Priest for another week. Our thanks to Father Ian Van Heusen for visiting with us today. If you missed any part of our program, you can play our past shows by going to catholic540am.org and clicking on local programs. The executive director of Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio is Cecilia Flannery. Our director of programming is Peter K. O'Connell. The coordinating producer for Meet the Priest is Lucienne Pereira Passerin. Our engineer is Keith Flannery. I'm Mandy Howard. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.
Thanks, good. Cool.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to check the comments online. We're still live, by the way, Peter. But let me just, I think there's a few people watch online. I don't know if there's any comments, but I'll check later and just kind of interact with people. But thanks, guys.
No, thank you. That was wonderful. We really appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
I really appreciate it. Thanks. It was. Thanks.
All right. So do you want us to
I think we can just close it out. Let me just go off the live stream real quick.